Now, some of you might recognize that blue moon that I've used on a couple of postings dealing with some moon events, and recently a constellation Orion / Betelgeuse event that on my YouTube channel is entitled Heart Alignment. And in that, God used some trees out in front of my house where he lined up the moon twice for me, or for you, and that would be a full moon or near full moon, where the moons shone through a heart silhouette in some of the branches about 40 feet off the ground. And I lined up perfectly, so you got this heart silhouette with the moon in the middle and what looks to be a bride and a bridegroom holding hands. And then recently, on the morning of August 30th, which I believe was Pentecost, that being from sunset of August 29th to sunset of August 30th, well, their Betelgeuse was right there in the middle of that heart-shaped silhouette, right where the hands were, and I thought, that's the Lord's wedding ring to his bride. Because there's multiple prophetic dreams that I've collected over the years where it appears that Betelgeuse is going to go supernova. And there's no certain way to predict that or guarantee that. It's just that this is the only star that plots with planetary virtual software. When dialed into these dreams, well, it produces Betelgeuse. And currently, the majority of the scientific community think Betelgeuse could go supernova at any moment, from now until another 100,000 years. But recent data from the Hubble telescope and other things lead them to believe that this thing could pop at any time. And here I'm looking out my front window, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I chose that time because that is the evening sacrifice time back in Jerusalem. And it's also the midnight hour at the international date line when you dial it in to 5 o'clock in the morning Pacific Standard Time, and that's where I'm located. And the fact that you probably have a 5 to 10 minute window for Betelgeuse ever lining up in that heart-shaped silhouette in my trees at 5 o'clock in the morning, well, that should probably tell you something. And since then, the Lord's getting me up every morning right around 5 o'clock for me to set my eyes on Betelgeuse to find out where it's at in front of my house. Well, after 2 weeks from Pentecost, we have the full moon of the harvest September moon, and that ends tonight. Well, last night it was orange, almost red, for its entire trek across the sky above my house. Pretty cool. Well, on September 9th, that would be 909, a number that I consistently have been receiving for the last 6 months, and since Pentecost, the constellation Orion, Betelgeuse being its right shoulder, has kind of migrated southward from the location where it produced Betelgeuse being in that heart-shaped silhouette. So now the only way I can find it is I got to go to the south end of my house and look out the window from there. And sure enough, it was kind of lining up with some of the branches on the south end of the trees, the branches actually pointing south. And when I first started to notice that, well, there was one huge branch that you're looking at right there on the screen. And I thought, now, wouldn't that be wild if Betelgeuse at 5 o'clock in the morning, let's say 5 to 6 o'clock, sometime in there, was right off the tip of that branch, as if the branch was pointing to it. And as the days progressed, that is exactly what happened. So I'm thinking, here God's doing it again. He's messing with my trees and having way too much fun. Because by the time we reached September 9th, another number I've received for the last 6 months on dozens and dozens of occasions, well, I came to understand that that probably is pointing to 909, which is September 9th. In addition, Job 909 is one of only 3 places in the entire Bible that God actually identifies and names a constellation, and that's the constellation Orion. Hello, there's not such thing as a coincidence, and here that branch is pointing right to it on the very minute of that evening sacrifice in Jerusalem and the midnight hour on the international dateline. Well, what does all this have to do with the coat of arms of Prince Charles, now the king, as well as what has it to do with Betelgeuse and or a supernova from Betelgeuse? Well, I did not receive the information of the Queen's death until later on in the morning, after I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning on September 9th. 909. And as I was looking and watching Betelgeuse line up right off the tip of this branch, a couple scriptures came to mind. And that is, what is the sign of the Lord's coming? We've got Luke 17:24 and Matthew 24:27, speaking of flashes of lightning. Luke says, from one side of heaven to the other. Matthew, Jesus says, from the east to the west. And that it hit me. weather fronts, weather storms, hurricanes, cyclones, anything that causes lightning rarely, if ever, travels east to west once it starts to track over land. And we haven't seen anything big enough to produce lightning from one side of heaven to the other side of heaven. But there is a phenomenon that will do that, and that's a supernova. Because it is a star exploding and spewing light all over the heavens, well, it will line up with the parade route of stars and constellations, which for us in the northern hemisphere is from east to west. In other words, it would be east to west in Jerusalem. That is the only cosmic phenomenon or atmospheric phenomenon that will create or produce flashes of light or flashes of brilliance from east to west in a magnitude that will light up much of the sky. And the Greek there, that most of the translations translate as lightning, means a flash of brightness or a flash of luster. And one other incredible coincidence is in Matthew 24:28, the next verse, where Jesus says something about where the dead body or carcass is, the eagles gather. And I have never figured out what that meant. I thought, since this whole passage is talking about the climax or the majority parts of the tribulation, where there is major signs and wonders and carnage everywhere, well, that could be vultures or eagles coming to feed on the carcasses. Except we're probably talking millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people being destroyed by some of these world events. Just ain't enough eagles or vultures out there. Well, like I said, later on that morning, I learned that Queen Elizabeth passed, and obviously that means Prince Philip will now become king, and now has, which means there is going to be a lot of ceremony and a lot of formal parading for both the funeral and the crowning of the new king. And at the funeral, don't you know that every dignitary from all the world is going to show up for that funeral? So where the carcass or dead body is, the eagles of the nations shall gather. That is what hit my spirit. I could be totally off, but then again, I could be totally on. And if I'm on, this is just one more prophetic being fulfilled in these end time days. So what does that have to do with the coat of arms? Well, here it is again. That lion griffin on the very top of the crown, at the top of the image, as well as all over the shield, and then the large one on the upper left-hand side is identical to the beast defined in Revelations chapter 13, 1 and 2. And this beast receives its authority and power from the dragon. And you will see a red dragon on the lower right-hand corner. And this has been on the coat of arms for Prince Philip all his life, and it's also on the coat of arms for Queen Elizabeth. And if you have taken the time to watch the coronation and the declaration of Prince Charles being sworn in and anointed as king, you will notice that all his color guard are wearing uniforms covered in this lion, leopard, beast image. Now, a lot of Christians have discerned this, but yet the monarchy of Great Britain appears to be clueless as what's in the Bible. Well, maybe that's because they are not Bible-believing Christians. A better explanation is that they are most probably a collection of secret society world elite leaders. And you can Google this. Go ahead, do it. Go Google Red Dragon Prince Charles. This is the Order of the Red Dragon, and I've seen videos of the Queen anointing and laying hands on Prince Charles, saying that he now has the authority given him by the Red Dragon. Those words came out of her mouth. And when you go look to see where that Red Dragon Society came from, it started back in like 1410 or something like that, and it was kind of on the order of the Templars, and mainly the nations that were in power at that time, which I call the Akistans. Those are the nations around all the Akistans in Siberia and Croatia and Germany, and the area that became kind of the Second Vatican. And the Vatican itself took on this Order of the Dragon. They were called Draconians. And later it was incorporated by the Vlads. That would be Vlad Dracul and his son, Vlad the Impaler, where the storyline of Dracula came from. And so you have the British monarch openly declaring that that's where their authority is from. And according to Revelation 13, that beast system is now in full gallop. And another number that the Lord has given me over the last many months is 919. Well, what happens on September 19th? Well, that's when the eagles gather around the dead body on September 19th. That's the funeral. So, family, we are headed headlong into end-time events, which may begin with a big supernova or the sign of his coming, a brilliant light lighting up much of our horizon, the bright and morning star, flashing its brilliance from east to west, possibly fulfilling a number a lot of people beginning, including myself, of 911, September 11th. And that concludes at midnight International Dateline in only a few hours. So that's how some of this stuff could fall into place. I'm just telling you what I've been seeing. I'm certainly not making any of this up, but I bear witness to what I'm seeing. I bear witness to the Lord messing with my pine trees. And some of you might think I'm kidding. I mean, check this out. The funeral route for the Queen on September 11th, starting about midday, produces a funeral route that looks like this. And I went, I've seen that before. It kind of looks like this. That branch I was referring to. Let me superimpose that branch on this funeral route. I mean, it doesn't get any closer than that. Like I said, God's messing with my trees. But I certainly didn't plan that funeral route, and here it lines up perfectly. What does that tell you? I'll leave that for you to figure out. But I think it might mean something Betelgeuse. On or about 9/11 or September 11th, around the midnight hour for this world, which is defined by the last few minutes of the International Dateline West, that equating to the 9th hour or the evening sacrifice in Jerusalem if there were a temple to sacrifice in. We'll know in the next week, starting at the midnight hour at the International Dateline up until the 19th of September, the funeral. Let me just say, I don't know what else to do with this stuff. In fact, I hope I'm wrong, because that means things are going to get ugly. But then again, for the bride, it means things are going to be wonderful, because she will be kept out of the hour of testing that will come upon the entire world. That's Revelations 3, verses 8 through 11. So now you know why I've got my blue moon with Britain's coat of arms plastered on the front of it. And I'll put this video together with this current update on the front and the previous video that I posted a day or two after Pentecost here a few weeks back. That'll be on the second half, so you get to see the whole thing. So go ahead and connect the dots, see what you come up with. I know there's a lot there, but this is overwhelming. Maranatha. So back in November of 2020, I had a very unique experience walking out my front door. This is about 11 p.m. and it was just after a full blue moon, which is a double full moon in the same month. And that last moon of that October was starting to wane. And I thought, I wonder where it's at, because it's still quite full, just 2 or 3 days after it was full. And I looked up and this is what I saw. That thing was peeking through kind of an opening in some of the branches of my favorite tree. And then just a month or 3 later, during the full moon of Purim, that being around February 25th of 2021, it happened again. Now, it happening once was quite remarkable. Happening twice is astronomical. Well, it happened a third time. And it happened on the morning that I anticipated was God's true Pentecost for 2022. Not only on that morning, but on the very hour that back in Jerusalem, they would be conducting the Pentecost rites in the temple, which included a 2-loaf new grain wave offering, accompanied by the sacrifice of 2 lambs, this being about 3 p.m. Jerusalem time. Well, 3 p.m. Jerusalem time for August 30th is 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where I live, on the same day, the morning of the 30th of August. And this is what I calculated to be the day of Pentecost. From sundown on August 29th through 24 hours up until sundown the 30th of August. And what happened is I woke up about 5-10 minutes before 5 a.m. and I remembered this day, and I remembered Pentecost, and I remembered the Pentecostal temple rites, and I thought, whoa, this is going to happen in just a few minutes. Now, my focus through many of my videos is that there's a great possibility that Betelgeuse is going to go supernova, as described in prophetic dreams that I've collected over the years, these dreams going back many years, and some as recent as a couple days ago. So I thought, well, God's getting me up for some reason. So I grabbed my cell phone that's got a pretty good camera in it, and I walked into one of the rooms that face east because Betelgeuse of the constellation Orion rises in the east right about this time. And I thought, well, I'm going to go look for Betelgeuse. And I walked into the room, stood right in the middle of the window, looked east, couldn't find Betelgeuse. Well, obviously, it didn't go supernova because I would have seen a supernova, but I couldn't find the star at all until I looked just slightly to the right of where I expected it to be, and there it was, right in the middle of that same heart outline that I found in my favorite pine tree, where a couple years earlier, I'm observing these moons right in the middle of this heart-shaped outline. Wrap your head around that. That's the third time God used that heart-shaped outline using the very galactic heavenly body that he often uses for such things. This is what I saw. And you'll note I can barely make out the constellation Orion because it's behind the trees, obviously. But I can see Orion's belt, and I can see the star Rigel, which is one of the feet of the constellation Orion. What you don't see is Betelgeuse, but I knew where it was in relationship to the belt and to Rigel, which you see just to the right of that main tree trunk. And I'm pretty sure, when estimating its location in relationship to Orion's belt and Rigel, that it's going to be right behind those two little branches in the middle of that heart silhouette. So I'm kind of looking back and forth and up and down and putting my head to the left and to the right, and I could see it flicker through the two branches that meet in the middle of this heart. Now take a look at both of these pictures when this was displayed through the tree by, I believe, the Lord, in the middle of this heart-shaped outline with the moon right there in the center. After a couple postings of this video, and again, I put it at the very end of this video, so you can go watch that. It's only about 5 minutes long. I had a number of people saying, if you look close enough and use a little bit of imagination, you see the bridegroom on the left and the bride on the right, and their arms are crossing over that heart shape and they're holding hands. And I never picked up on that until somebody told me that, and a number of people told me that. Now, what I find remarkable is right where the two branches, and those are two separate smaller branches that are reaching across that heart-shaped silhouette, those two small branches are touching. And right where they were touching, that is where I saw Betelgeuse flickering through the branches, as if it were the bridegroom placing a wedding ring on the hand of the bride. And I present that as a possible image that the Lord wants us to see. And if I remember correctly, I made such a comment in video 3 or 4 of my 5-part series on decoding the 2-moon, 4-moon, blood moon, tetrad, planet alignment dreams, where I made comment that if God pops off Betelgeuse as a supernova, it would make one incredible wedding ring for the bride. And here I'm seeing Betelgeuse flickering through the tree branches, where it looks like I have an image of the bridegroom putting a wedding ring on the hand of the image of the bride. Here's the exact location that I saw Betelgeuse flickering through the tree branches. And I'm seeing all this at 5 a.m. in the morning, which corresponds to 3 p.m. Jerusalem time on the 30th of August. The exact time back in Jerusalem, 3 p.m., when they conducted the second sacrifice of the day, where they waved the 2 loaves and sacrificed the 2 lambs. The 2 loaves representing the bride and the bridegroom, the 2 lambs representing the bride and the bridegroom. And this is the day I came up with after God corrected me multiple times, kind of zeroing in on the proper day. Well, sunset August 29th to sunset August 30th of 2022 is what I finally came up with as Pentecost for this year, 2022. And if I could be so bold as to say, that's quite the confirmation from God that I finally got it right. That Pentecost is determined using those parameters that God gave me over the years and finally over these last few weeks, dialing in the very specifics. There is only one algorithm or recipe or count methodology that God accepts. And I simply cannot ignore what my eyes have seen in those trees. To me, that is a triple emphasis. And there is just simply no coincidence that this happened on the very second when the Pentecost temple offerings are waved before the Lord. I mean, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, Betelgeuse would not have been right in the middle of those two branches where people have imagined that to be the bride and the bridegroom, the bride receiving her wedding ring. I mean, 10 minutes either way, and that would not have happened. How about an hour or 2 hours difference? No, I got up at that specific time. I looked out my window that very second. There it was. Now, this is a day later at the same time, 5 a.m. on the dot, and Betelgeuse is below the hands. And I'll superimpose this along with a picture of the constellation Orion. You can see how the stars lined up correctly. And I'm not making this up. This happened. That was Betelgeuse. That was the constellation Orion. And from the other pictures, you can tell that that is the heart-shaped outline that God used in the trees to send a powerful love message to his bride. Hopefully that's you. And let me include this little tidbit just to add a little weight to what it was I saw. I got up the next 3 mornings at 5 a.m. to look for Betelgeuse, and all I had was cloud cover. And I thought to myself, well, there was no cloud cover on the 30th or the 31st. Isn't that interesting? So what does this all mean? It means we are in the season, the timeline of Pentecost. It started just a few days ago, and it could very well be pointing to Betelgeuse actually going supernova, as these dreamers had in their prophetic dreams. Not saying it's going to, not saying it's not going to. But if it does, I would think rapture is imminent. We best throw everything into pursuing our bridegroom, our Lord Christ Jesus, Yahshua HaMashiach. So that's my confirmation that I finally got the day of Pentecost correct. And I'll leave you with that. And in a few seconds here, you'll have the opportunity to see that short 5-minute video on the 2 moons. Hear me now, 2 moons that God presented his bride through that outline of the heart in those trees. And of course, that's on my YouTube channel. You can always look it up, and I'll put it on the iCard that you can pull down and click on it if you ever want to share it with anyone. So that's all I have. I hope it has blessed you and got you more excited and hopeful for the return of our bridegroom. Maranatha.